Hey guys, welcome. This is a match that I am absolutely thrilled and excited to bring you guys, and it has nothing to do with me being in charge of Pokemon Perfect or the fact that I hope it'll get some views on my channel or anything like that. Just as a long-time competitive Pokemon fan, this is the kind of match that you only get once in a while, and it's just a treat. Anyone who has an appreciation for the highest level of play, here it is. This is the finals of the Pokemon Perfect ADV qualifier. It is the Thelinearcurve against Astamatitos. And if you guys have been watching my channel for a long time, I've been doing this for years and years and years despite deleting the channel a time or two. I started this in 2012, I think, or 11, somewhere back there. You've probably heard me use terms like high-level player, SPL player, excellent player, any of that. And when I say it, I mean it. I'm not just blowing smoke. But I have to draw the distinction that even though this channel often does feature really, really good ADV players or SPL level players, Posse G, Marco P, those kind of guys, these two, Lanier and Asta, arguably may be the best two players in the world. These very, very realistically might literally be the first and second best player in the world. If you want to make an argument, I mean, as to who that is, that's subjective, but there's no argument that they're both in the top five somewhere. I would say the top five is probably these two guys, BKC, Roro, Ojama, Triangles. I know I just said six. I don't know who the odd man out would be out of that group, but it's probably five of those six, and these two are definitely there. Like I said, they might be the best and the second best ADV player in the world. And what also intrigues me about this match is that they have completely different styles and play this game in a very different way. So for me, just as a fan of ADV, as a fan of competitive Pokemon, I am very, very excited for this. It's a best of three. I don't really care who wins, but I really hope it goes to a third game just for the sake of getting to see more of this. Sit back and enjoy the ride. I will try to keep up with what we're about to see. Lanier's on the bottom, he's on the alt my prehensile trunk, and he's against Astamatitos on the top. We have a Milotic and a meta lead, and it's going to be a switch from the meta because it probably can't overly hurt the Milotic. And Milo is going to go for Hypno, so we're going to pause right here just for some information. So, lead Milo is weird. There's a Celebi here, which, if it had Baton Pass, I would think that would be the lead. Now, the fact that Milotic has Hypno, which is quite uncommon these days, I'd say it's probably maybe the third most common set. By far the standard set is Surf, Toxic, Refresh, Recover. The second most common set, I would say, has Ice Beam somewhere in there, either over Toxic or over Refresh, based on what the team needs. Hypnosis has largely faded from Milo. So based on what I'm seeing so far, the Milotic and the Celebi, I already think it's some kind of either balanced team or physical team leaning on the balanced side. Hypnosis indicates to me that he's trying to shut off a key wall, so something like a Salamence, something like a Snorlax, something like a Coon can set up on the sleeping Pokemon and try to sweep. Asta, on the other hand, it's still TBD. He's a big, just TSS, standard, Skarmory kind of guy. Skarmory is Asta's bread and butter at the end of the day. So if it was something along those lines, that would not surprise me. So we see Toxic here from Bliss on the Natural Cure Celebi. Not a huge deal. Celebi actually does have Baton Pass, but he didn't lead with it. So that makes it really interesting because Milotic, maybe the goal with the Milo lead, it obviously doesn't match up well against Zapdos, but clearly with both Lax and Celebi, Lanier has good switches into a Zapdos. So perhaps the goal is you get the Milotic against the other very common lead, Tyranitar, and that theoretically gives you a free Hypnosis, especially if they lead Tar and then they switch Skarm into Milotic, which would make a lot of sense, or a fellow Milotic into your Milotic. Those are both really good targets to get hit with Hypnosis, so I think he might be thinking along those lines. Alright, so we'll pause here. So here is a Gyarados, which is similar, but obviously not the same as the Salamence that I mentioned earlier. So all signs would point to me that there would be a Magneton somewhere for Lanier. It just makes too much sense. All four of these Pokemon want Skarmory the Wall, not necessarily Skarmory the Spiker, but Skarmory the Wall to not be there. So clearly, to me, 100% there's going to be a mag in the back for Lanier. That would leave you with only one other poke, and I would say it would have to be some kind of rock resist. Magneton does not count as a reliable rock resist, especially if it is a magnet Magneton, which it probably is on this team. So this is probably either some weird mag doll for Lanier, or more likely the last poke is something like a Swampert, something like a Jirachi, could be a Metagross. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be double water. He does have the Milotic, so it doesn't have to be Swampert. So yeah, I think like a Metagross or a Rachi would probably make a lot of sense, but it's going to be Mag plus some kind of Rock Resist. It could just be Claydol. And Asta hasn't really shown anything too exciting. It looks like a fairly standard TSS up to this point. So Asta's going to do the Magneton check here because it's a very obvious time to switch it in. Lanier, all over it, is going to Earthquake into Skarmory, knowing that something like that was going to happen. He now gets out of the way, goes to Milotic, knowing that T-Tar is not going to stay in and get hit. And Lanier doing due diligence here to have discipline to not run his Magneton into a YOLO Skarm, and based on that damage roll, I think he's right. I really doubt on this team. I mean, I guess an offensive Milotic would make sense on this team more so than on others, but I would assume this is some kind of just generic defensive Milotic to most extents. I mean, maybe he's got a little special attack. He might have none at all. He might have a little tiny bit, but this is not an offensive Milo. And the fact that a Surf is doing that amount of damage, it's got to be a YOLO Skarm on the other side. For those of you unfamiliar with the term, YOLO Skarm is the heavily attack, heavily speed, often max invested Skarmory that has HP ground. The whole goal being Magneton comes in on you, and you basically turn the tables on it. You think the Magneton player that you're trapping the Skarm and going to kill it, but actually he just outspeeds and kills you with HP ground, and all of a sudden you're in deep doo-doo because you were relying on Magneton to remove Skarmory. Didn't work that way, and now Skarm is spiking up on you. Now, hey, that sounds amazing. Why isn't that set everywhere? Well, because it's just worse in basically every matchup where your opponent doesn't have a Magneton. You lose so much bulk. You can't just sit in on waters all day or just tank Aerodactyl hits all day the way that you would in other matchups. So it's basically a trade-off. You are very reliably able to get spikes down through Magneton, which other Skarms cannot do. But when you're not against Magneton, your Skarm's a heck of a lot worse. There are a couple other advantages. I mean, because you're so fast, you can run Taunt, and you'll just always shut off other Skarmories. So, I mean, there are a couple of other situations, but it's not something you should just mindlessly slap onto a team. You have to really consider what it is that you need your team to do as opposed to just throwing it on. Sometimes you need Skarm to actually be a wall against certain things. Other times, you don't. But it looks, based on this damage roll, that it is in fact a YOLO Skarm, so that might complicate things for Lanier. Good for him to have the discipline to not run Magneton in it, despite having multiple opportunities to do so. And he's going to have an opportunity here to Hypnosis Fish on the Bliss and prevent a Soft Boil. So basically, he has a 60-40 chance here, that's the accuracy of Hypnosis, to prevent a Soft Boiled from happening. But it's interesting both ways. Hypnosis misses, but he didn't actually, Blissey, Asta, did not actually go for Soft Boiled, went for Ice Beam, trying to prevent a Celebi switch in on that turn. So Hypnosis is now going to hit the second time. Blissey prevented from Soft Boiled. Whether or not Lanier has something that can punish the Bliss, yet to be determined, but now he's going to over-predict, thinking there'll be a switch, which does not come, and he goes for a Surf, which Blissey obviously does not care about, can take several more without being threatened. So it is Metagross here for Lanier, and I'm convinced the last poke is Magneton. It pretty much has to be. So more or less the full team has been revealed for Lanier. Here is Swampert for Asta. His full team is not revealed. The last poke could be, I mean, Gengar or Dugtrio are the two standard things, but it could also be something like a Salamence or some kind of physical threat. Because remember, we have a YOLO Scarm, which is specifically trying to remove Magneton, and that's going to set up physical threats. And basically, when you have spikes down, something like a Salamence or whatever physical sweeper is a lot more dangerous. It's some kind of setup sweeper. It could be a Coon, it could be a Rachi, but I would think that it is not guaranteed to be a Gengar or a Dugtrio the way that it would be on a more traditional TSS. So Gyra is going to net Lanier the first knockout of the game. It's got Double Edge, so it is not going to have Taunt. We actually know the full move set now. It's got the Dragon Dance HP Flying Earthquake Double Edge set. Milotic switching into Scarm now. Lanier again with tremendous discipline to not go to his Magneton that I am positive he has in the back. And that Drill Peck doing 23% again indicates there's no way. It doesn't do anywhere near that normally against Milotic. So again, this Scarm is clearly very attack invested. It is clear as day the YOLO Scarm. And it's going to go down here after getting only one layer of spikes down via repeated surfs. But he's got Milotic low, and it's last poked Starmie for Asta. That is not what I thought it would be, but it does make sense. It's got to be an offensive star on this team. So for sure, Milotic has to get out of the way of a Thunderbolt that would kill it. But a fantastic prediction for Asta. Knowing Milotic would not stay in, he has the balls to go Ice Beam into the Milotic, which would have netted a free recover, but instead he Ice Beams, and then he Ice Beams again, and Lanier loses what was a healthy Celebi thanks to that prediction from Asta. And Lanier did not go to the Snorlax, which typically is a good counter to the Starmie, but had Asta gone Hydro Pump, the Lax would have been in trouble, and it would have stepped on the spike on the way in, so there was a danger there. But Asta, with the right read, is going to kill off the Celebi. That being said, Lanier does have the lead here, 5-4. His full team is not revealed, but again, it's Magneton. Swampert here is Endeavorpert, which is a Pokemon that Asta uses and likes a lot. He goes Endeavor here, and it puts the Milotic in the range where Hydro Pump, which is in Torrent range, would kill it, and does. And Lanier down to 20 seconds on his timer. In real time, this must be very tense. Definitely taking his time to figure out the play. He decides to go to his Metagross. He gets Endeavored, but he goes Agility and becomes faster than anything on Asta's team, including the speed-boosted Swampert. So now Asta has to figure out what he's going to sacrifice here. Earthquake is going to take out Bliss when combined with the Sand. And now we're going to pause again. We've got ourselves a 3-4 situation, so now Asta has to figure out what to do. Because his stuff is pretty low here, so his options are fairly limited, right? So he goes to his own Metagross. If this is a standard Agility Gross, which has max or close to max attack, all Lanier has to do is click Earthquake, which Asta does not have a great switch for. So going to his own meta does not make a lot of sense. We can check out Swampert here, who, he doesn't even have lefties, so he's not going to gain those. He's at 18%. And the Salac Berry was already eaten, so he has no way to get faster than the Metagross, so that would also just kill it. So that more or less leaves him with just Starmie, which is at 100%. Now, Starmie does not die to a Meteor Mash or an Earthquake, unless a critical hit, of course, which Asta is in no position to play around. So what happens here is if he goes to Starmie, which is his only play, because both of these other things at 50% and 18% respectively would instantly die. When he goes to Starmie, we have the mind game of, does Starmie go immediately for Hydro Pump? And does Lanier want to risk the miss? And then on the flip side of that, does Lanier just go for Explosion? But if he does go for Explosion, does Asta get sneaky and have him explode on one of these things instead? Probably the Swampert, because it's probably useless at this point, being so low and not having its Salac Berry. So it's all a big mind game. So let's say if Asta goes to Starmie and then he switches to the Swampert trying to bait out the Explosion. If Lanier calls that, which he's very capable of doing, and he just clicks Earthquake instead, Lanier's probably dead. There's just no way out of this game. So this is a very crucial turn in which Asta must be right. There is no play at all other than going to the Starmie. The question becomes, does Asta switch or not, and does Lanier call it or not? The generically safe play is to just explode, but that could also lose you value if you're in Lanier's seat, if you end up exploding on something that is essentially useless, like the Swampert. So let's see what they both do. This is a very important turn, very well could decide the entire game. Asta does try to bait the explosion, and Lanier does, in fact, explode. So Asta basically gets the get out of jail free card there. That was a very, very important turn. And now the Starmie might be a real threat, or at least it has a chance to be. The Lax can wall it, but the Lax is getting low and it has to step on the spike on the way in. He's one crit Hydro Pump away from death. And, I mean, the other thing, like I said, is like if Asta were wrong, / if Lanier were right, depending on how you want to look at it, if Lanier had just clicked Earthquake there, for example, I think the game is over. I think Asta loses. So that was an opportunity there for Lanier to grab the game by the balls and more or less secure his victory. It didn't go his way. This game now can clearly still go either way. I think Lanier still probably has a little bit of an advantage, but Lanier more or less could have clinched it there. And I don't know if that was him predicting incorrectly or Asta outplaying him or a little bit of both, but Lanier was not able to read Asta correctly. So now we end up with this. Hey, look, it's Mag, unsurprising. Starmie should be able to kill that from here with a Hydro Pump should it connect. There's a critical hit, which is going to take any suspense out of it. Theoretically, that could have been a heavily special defense-invested Magneton, which used to be a thing back in the day. But I really, really doubt that's the case here. That's his only way of removing Skarm. He wants to get as few layers of spikes as possible against him. So it's probably simply a Magneton, and if it was not holding lefties, so it would make sense that it's Magnet. It doesn't make any sense that it would be bulky. It's probably something very close to a 252 Magneton. Maybe it cheats a little bit somewhere and has some HP, but it's probably very, very close, if not literally simply 252. So now, this leaves us in this position. So the Starmie has not actually shown Thunderbolt, but it is all but guaranteed that he has it. So the Gyarados, who can live an Ice Beam and who can live a Hydro Pump, needs to be aware of that if Starmie does in fact have Thunderbolt, which it probably does, the Gyara at 42% is absolutely super dead to that. And then we have the Lax here at 65%, who will live anything other than a crit Hydro Pump. But the Lax, unless it blows up, cannot one-hit the Starmie back either without a crit. However, what can happen here, and the Lax has Body Slam, we've already seen it, is he could paralyze the Starmie, which would of course enable him to outspeed it and then kill it on the subsequent turn. So there's things that can happen both ways here. There's also switches that could happen depending on what the prediction is. For example, if Asta thinks that Lanier is simply going to go for Body Slam, maybe he goes to Metagross, because if the para doesn't come and it's only 30-70 for the para to happen, then the meta comes in, lives that, outspeeds the Lax, and now has a chance to do whatever it is he wants to do. Maybe it's just Explosion, maybe it's a free Meteor Mash, but all of a sudden the meta becomes dangerous again. But again, flip that. Let's say that Lanier instead goes for Earthquake, anticipating the Metagross. What if the Starmie simply stays in and Hydro Pumps you? Now all of a sudden you're in trouble, because if Hydro Pump doesn't miss, the Starmie just cleans you up. So there's a lot to think about here for both guys. We'll see how they both handle this situation, but this is a very mind game focused chess match of a late game. Asta stays in, goes Hydro Pump, and there's Earthquake for Lanier. Okay, so this is really interesting, especially with the damage roll. So the Hydro Pump does 32%, and it leaves the Lax at 33%. So that makes it even more complex, because if they both stay in and they do this again, the Hydro Pump may or may not kill the Lax before it gets a chance to retaliate. Now, obviously, there was no para chance there because he went for Earthquake, so he wanted to prevent any chance of the meta coming in. I understand this play because it covers both plays. So by going for Earthquake, you prevent the free meta switch, which is great, and you also make it so Starmie is in KO range, because now Body Slam would kill the Starmie. Or Shadow Ball would also do it if he has that. And then obviously Self-Destruct, if he has that, would kill either poke. But Body Slam should be enough now. So this is going to... I mean, I don't think that Lanier has a choice, because if we think that Asta's going to stay in and Hydro Pump again, which is a decent chance of him doing, yeah, I don't know that Lanier has a choice, because what's he going to do? Go to the Gyarados on the Hydro Pump? That's great, but then Asta's just going to stay in and Thunderbolt, and then Lanier's really dead, because the Lax would have to come back in on the spikes. So I think at this point, Lanier has no choice but to just stay in and hope that he lives the Hydro Pump, or that the Hydro Pump misses. Now on Asta's end, he has to figure out, does he want to chance it here? Does he... First of all, it's 80-20 if does the Hydro Pump hit at all. If that were the only decision, obviously you go for it, because 80 is way more likely than 20. But the other factor, it's not just whether or not it hits, it's whether or not it kills. Now, this is probably a kind of difficult calc to do, because nobody knows how to EV Snorlax. Who knows what it has for HP or special defense or whatever. It's probably really tricky to know exactly what damage range you're working with here. But basically the goal is to figure out what your overall chance is of killing the Lax here. That's including your chances of actually hitting it. And then based on that, what kind of roll do you need to kill the Lax? So Asta here has a decision to make, because this is probably a Body Slam turn from Lanier. So he still has that option that he had before of going to the meta here, which I think makes the most sense. I mean, Lanier's very capable of making any play. He's great at making reads, and he's just... I've seen Lanier do some bold things that other players just would not have the balls to do. But it feels very unlikely to me that Lanier goes Earthquake here again. It only did 46% before, so it's entirely possible, if not likely, in fact, that even with the sand, another Earthquake does not kill the Starmie. It is possible, even though it'll only be by the skin of its teeth, that the Starmie survives a subsequent Earthquake, and that's an absolute disaster for Lanier. So I think Earthquake does not make sense here. I think it's a Body Slam turn for Lanier, and that gives Asta the option to go for that Metagross play. And if it doesn't work out, let's say that he does try to go for the Metagross play, and Lanier actually does just go Earthquake again, that doesn't leave Asta any worse off than he is right now, because then he could just go back to Starmie, try the Hydro Pump thing again, and then the Starmie would beat the Gyarados 1v1. So, I mean, I think the play here, from both of their seats, I think you Body Slam if you're Lanier, and I think you go to Metagross if you're Asta. But we'll see if that's what either of them do. So Asta does go to the meta. Wow, but Lanier does not go for the Body Slam or the Earthquake. He instead opts for a Shadow Ball, which I think the logic behind that is he's not confident enough that Body Slam will kill the Starmie, which I think he had to gamble on. I think Body Slam's the play there. I don't like this play from Lanier. But Shadow Ball certainly would have killed the Starmie had it connected, and it would have knocked it out. And then I think the thought process there, so if you, let's say you kill the Starmie, and then the Lax dies to the sand or what have you, that leaves you with Gyarados against meta, and then Gyarados simply goes for the Earthquake and presumably beats most Metagross 1v1 given the current situation. So this play is interesting. By not Body Slamming, not that there's any guarantee that the power would have come, but by not Body Slamming, he misses out on any chance that he may have had to paralyze the Metagross here. So now it just becomes a mind game again. The Metagross is obviously faster, and if Lanier thinks that it's going to be a self-destruct, or sorry, an explosion, actually, if it's explosion, I think Lanier is dead anyway. Most likely. If he predicts Meteor Mash, you clearly go to Gyra here. If you predict Earthquake, you clearly go to Gyra here. If it's Explosion, I think you have to go to Gyra either way, because if it's Explosion, you get the Gyra boomed on, Lax comes in, steps on spikes, and you just have to hope that he's in a position where he's still healthy enough to barely live a Thunderbolt or an Ice Beam. So basically, you're only out if you're Lanier at that point, is to hope that Asta goes for Hydro Pump and simply misses it. I think that is the way that Lanier at this point gets out of this game. Because I think this is a boom turn for Asta. I don't think Lanier has a great counterplay. I think he has to just go to Gyra. And the way that I see this game playing out is it comes down to the Starmie and the Lax, and it simply comes down to the 80-20 of does the Hydro Pump connect. But let's see if that is the actuality of it. Here's the Gyra switch. I think he's basically obligated to do that. Yeah, and there's the boom. So both the players agree. They both see it the same way that I do. So it's going to come down to the Lax. The question is, does Starmie have, say, Psychic for the knockout here? But he's not going to Thunderbolt. He's not going to Ice Beam. It's going to come down to a Hydro Pump. Does he connect with the 80-20? He does. And Asta is going to take this game, which, I mean, can't say surprising, because, I mean, Asta is so good, as is Lanier. But, yeah, you know what? It felt to me like Lanier was ahead for a lot of this, and there were definitely some really high-level things going on in the late game. These guys were just playing a mental chess match. Asta eked it out, but I question two different plays. One of them, I don't know that Lanier screwed up. He simply got out-mind-gamed or made the wrong 50-50 call or whatever you want to call it by Asta, where he blew up on the useless pert as opposed to simply earthquaking again. And the second play, the one that I'm really not sure about, is that Shadow Ball turn. I feel like he should have body slammed there. I feel like that would have killed the Starmie, and you at least give yourself the chance to paralyze the Metagross. Now, granted, let's say that he body slams, and Metagross comes in, which is what happened, and you simply don't get the para, then the rest of the game would have played out exactly the way that it did in actuality, so it wouldn't have mattered. The meta just would have boomed on the Gyro. We would end up with a Starmie on the Lax. It would be the exact same situation, but at least you give yourself the 30% chance to find the para. 30%'s a lot. 3 times out of 10, the game has a different outcome. That's not bad, because that would, yeah, then he just follows up with Earthquake, and maybe he's good to go. Hard to say, but that was a really entertaining game. I hope the rest of the set is as good as this. Please leave a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I will see you guys in Game 2.